You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
Welcome to Women's Media Center Live. I'm Robin Morgan, and I am doing my little dance. I am so relieved and so happy that we have finally moved toward the formal step of an impeachment inquiry in the U.S. House of Representatives. It's due to all the actions that we took in the streets that in turn inspired and demanded of those in the House to finally act. And I'm excited about our show today, too, which by coincidence is incredibly timely. The guest for the conversation happens to be the vice chair of the Democratic Caucus. And since the Democrats control the House of Representatives, that makes her a very powerful person who did our interview and conversation 1 hour before she went on to the meeting with the other Democratic leadership at which they decided it was time to finally act. So we have that coming up, and Fighting Words and Surrealism Corner and a whole lot chock full. We better get going fast. But first, we have to go inside the headlines. Climate change statistics sometimes seem to blur together into one terrifying collage of bad news that makes you long to look away. No wonder young Greta Thunberg doesn't smile more often, you idiot. That's what I wanted to scream back at my television set when some commentator opined that the teenage climate change activist was so pretty but too somber. Anyway, one statistic stands out from the rest. It's in the World Meteorological Organization's latest report. Quote, recognizing that global temperatures have risen by 1.1 degrees Celsius since 1850, the report notes that they have gone up by 0.2 degrees Celsius between 2011 and 2015. Now there's warming for you in just 5 years. Smiling? Young Greta, along with hundreds of thousands of other conscientious boys and girls, teenagers and middle schoolers and their teachers and parents and friends and grandmothers, took to the streets of the world, 150 countries, last week, with marches, demonstrations, and school strikes, to move the world powers into acting, and acting fast, to address this global crisis. Greta herself, in an impassioned speech aimed at the United Nations Climate Action Summit and at world industry leaders last week, cried out with tears in her eyes but righteous anger in her voice, "How dare you!" in speaking of how they rob her of her future while endlessly debating the politics and cost-effectiveness of actually doing something to save the planet. A second strike is planned for September 27th. Thunberg also addressed the U.S. Congress, journeying to Washington after she arrived in the States from Europe via a solar-powered sailboat across the Atlantic. It helps restore one's faith in humanity, as does the news that now 17 states are suing Trump over his attempt to weaken the Endangered Species Act. With everything else happening in the courts and Trump, you might worry that such issues would get shoved to the back. But no, not endangered animals. As a matter of fact, that should include humans. A new study published in the Journal of American Medical Association's JAMA, Internal Medicine, surveyed American women between age 18 and 44. Its results shocked the researchers. At least 3.3 million women in that age group had been raped before they ever had a sexual encounter, and the researchers say that if the numbers had included all women, the results would be higher by many millions. The study found that most respondents were adolescents when they'd been raped, while most of the assailants average around age 27. and that these survivors were more likely to suffer worse long-term health concerns than women who had sex voluntarily the first time. These women had unwanted first pregnancies, abortions, endometriosis, pelvic inflammatory disease, and poor overall health, as well as difficulty completing tasks because of a physical or mental health condition. Dr. Laura Hawkes, the study's main author and a researcher at the Cambridge Health Alliance in Massachusetts, noted that the study data had been collected before the Me Too movement burst open, which in turn led to the surfacing of many more conversations and cases. The data studied was from an annual survey by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention called the National Survey of Family Growth. More than 26% of the women said they had been physically threatened during the encounter, 46% said they'd been physically held down, 56% said they'd been verbally pressured, and 16% said that the man had threatened to end the relationship if they didn't have sex. The forms of coercion were not mutually exclusive. Women's health experts, noting the importance of the study, are urging clinicians to screen women for sexual violence experiences and to ask them very carefully and gently about their first sexual experience in order to unearth this prior sexual trauma, which is so epidemic. Miki Dezaki, a Japanese student filmmaker, a man, wanted to make a documentary for his graduate thesis on the question still roiling Japanese politics. Why does a small but highly influential right-wing coterie still, 75 years later, dispute internationally accepted accounts of Japan's wartime atrocities? Dezaki focused on the Imperial Army's sexual enslavement of tens of thousands of Korean women in military brothels during World War II. His documentary explored in detail the conservative argument that the so-called comfort women were paid prostituted women. 5 of the conservatives are now suing him for defamation. Dezaki exposed the powerful bloc's influence at the highest levels of government, shaping what children are taught in school, what works of art can be shown, and how Japan conducts its foreign policy. Organizers of an international art fair, for example, in Nagoya, closed an exhibition after receiving threats about a statue symbolizing the Korean comfort women. Dezaki's 2-hour documentary called Shusenjo, the main battleground of the comfort woman issue, has been shown commercially in Japan and South Korea and will be shown on college campuses in the United States this autumn. Last, but so not least, and from here on in, headline news will be breaking way too fast for me to possibly keep up unless I were some sort of cross between Wonder Woman and CNN. Last but not least, the fight back to rescue democracy has begun in earnest, at high levels, although it started with us in the streets. In the UK, Britain's highest court, with an extraordinary, historic rebuke, ruled that Prime Minister Boris Johnson broke the law when he suspended Parliament in his obsessive drive to yank Britain out of the European Union. Johnson likely will be forced to resign, and Parliament is back in session. Oh yes, and here at home, you might have noticed that the United States House of Representatives is formally entering into full-blown impeachment inquiry hearings regarding Donald J. Trump's actions, not just those that installed him illegally in the White House, but even more importantly, those he engaged in while sitting in our Oval Office, which broke numerous laws, which threatened national security, and which threatened the legitimacy of our democratic electoral system. One long exhalation. Then a deep, big breath in, because here we go. Time for our first break, a very short one, I emphasize, because we have a lot of show coming up. There's a special Fighting Words, and there is a special conversation, which I hadn't expected to be, and there it was. So stay with us. Subscribe to this program on your favorite podcast platform and leave us a review. Follow us on Twitter at WMC Live, like our Facebook page at facebook.com/WMC Live, and visit us at WMCLive.com for more information about our show and our guests.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
And so we find ourselves in the surrealism corner. We would have to rename this segment the Surrealism Grand Ballroom instead of the Surrealism Corner if I were to try and cover the politics of this past few days. Instead, we have a few humble but startling medical items and two plain, startling, non-medical ones. Head author Jamie Luster, a researcher at the University of Michigan, led a study on rates of gonorrhea and chlamydia among 214 female students of a large Midwestern university. More than half of the women reported that they had done so-called extreme grooming, the removal of all pubic hair, weekly or daily, within the past year. Almost all were sexually active, and almost 10% had either gonococcal or chlamydial infections, confirmed by laboratory testing. Gonorrhea and chlamydia are the most commonly sexually transmitted diseases in the U.S., and women 15 to 24 years old have higher rates of both than any other sex and age group. Studies have suggested that shaving could cause tears or cuts in the skin that increase the risk for infection, and about 2/3 of extreme groomers reported having such injuries. Nevertheless, after controlling for parental income, race, year in school, and sexual frequency, Lester and the Michigan team found no association between extreme grooming and infections. Lester said, other study designs, like clinical trials for those that follow people over time, are needed to find what the actual risk is. Close quote. Now look, I don't care how many variables you control for. This is where I go with common sense and with other recent research. Extreme grooming is a, hair-raising problem and practice. And it infantilizes women, as well as being a ridiculously high financial expense and a serious physical discomfort, even pain, even if it's just a rash that persists from waxing. The shaving and waxing of such a vulnerable, tender part of the female anatomy is insane. This qualifies as bare stupidity. Neuroscientists often tell of a famous true-life case. In April 1929, a journalist from a Moscow newspaper showed up in the office of neuropsychologist Alexander Luria, and he became famous, this patient, known as Subject S. He had a problem, S did. He never forgot anything. He could run off long strings of numbers and words, scientific formula, all sorts of tests that Luria put him through. He literally could not forget. But that hindered him in everyday life. This is a very encouraging news item for those of us who suddenly think, why did I come into this room? And stand there with your keys in hand, looking for them. Well, S had a hard time understanding abstract concepts in everyday real life. He couldn't understand figurative language or even faces because he had memorized them at a particular point in time with the facial expressions and features relevant to that moment. Neuroscientists came to realize from his condition that the ability to forget was as vital as the ability to remember. In fact, the former might be necessary for the latter. Now, a new paper just published in the journal Science pinpoints a group of neurons in the brain that may be responsible for helping the brain to importantly forget. Neuroscientists at the Nagoya University in Japan have come across cells known as melanin concentrating hormone, or MCH neurons, that may be responsible for helping the brain to forget. MCH neurons fire electrical signals most actively when the mice that the experiments are being conducted on are in REM sleep, rapid eye movement sleep. You know, that phase of sleep characterized by rapid eye movement, elevated pulse, unique brain waves, and in humans, we don't know about other animals, produce vivid dreams. When the researchers tracked MCH signals in mice, they found the cells were suppressing neurons in the hippocampus, which plays a major role in consolidating memory. This may explain why many humans don't remember dreams when they wake up, since the neuron might be clearing up memory resources for the next day. Interestingly, judging what's important to remember versus what can be triaged is part of the brain's process. This is so cool. Ronald Davis, a neurobiologist at the Scripps Research Institute in Florida, has done studies on fruit flies indicating that the neurotransmitter dopamine is involved both in forming and forgetting memories, possibly because after a memory is formed, the slow, continual release of additional dopamine triggers the cascade of chemical reactions in neurons that store the memory, and that this eventually removes the memory unless, wait for it, unless another brain mechanism intervenes because it deems the memory important and interesting. There's a triage going on. Oh, cool, cool, cool. The fascination of the brain. Here's another reason why gender-specific medicine is important. I have frequently addressed it on this program as being highly beneficial for women, who only now are finally being included in clinical trials after pressure from the women's movement to the scientific community. Similarly, men have been excluded from clinical trials of new treatments for breast cancer. When new drugs come to market, there's little data to indicate whether they're safe or effective for men, although some drugs are approved for women only. The disease is extremely rare in men, fewer than 1% of breast cancer cases. Nevertheless, the FDA is calling on researchers to include male patients in clinical trials for breast cancer treatments. But pharmaceutical companies are not particularly interested in funding such trials because no one apparently cares about investing in a disease affecting only 1% of all breast cancers. The warning signs are similar to those in women: a lump in the breast, nipple pain, a sore on the nipple or on the areola, or swollen lymph glands under the arm. A positive result should alert female relatives that they need to be tested as well. Our next item, while not medical, is nonetheless sick. It's so stupid it makes you crazy. This month, we observe Banned Books Week. No, not in North Korea or Saudi Arabia or China. Here in the United States, where the state of access to literature in prisons is getting worse. Over 2 million people are incarcerated in the United States, and many prisons, including those in New York, Maryland, Washington State, Illinois, and elsewhere, have been banning as many as 10,000 books from prisons, including books by Alice Walker, Henry Louis Gates, Jr., John Grisham, and even Bob Dole. While books about Adolf Hitler and David Duke have been allowed, books about civil rights, women's rights, and prison conditions are often blocked. The federal prison system houses over 177,000 incarcerated people and is a model for prison policy across the country. Well, last year the Bureau of Prisons started a pilot program where incarcerated people would have to pay an unexplained 30% markup to buy books. Only after public outcry was the program rescinded. PEN America is urging people to tell Congress to please convene hearings on such practices in American prisons. You can find a petition on the website of PEN America, which is simply pen.org. And last, data analysis from art market information company ArtNet shows that only 11% of the art acquired by 26 top museums in the United States in the last decade were works by women. Between 2008 and 2018, only 29,247 works by female artists were acquired by institutions like the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Smithsonian American Art Museum, or the Los Angeles County Museum of Art. That's out of 260,470 total works. The data also showed that the peak number of acquisitions by female artists occurred in 2009 with a whopping 3,462, and the gender percentage has been relatively stagnant over the last 10 years. Guerrilla Girls, help! I know you never went away, but just saying we need you now more than ever. Because this is not surrealism, but it's sure surreal. From the surreal to the supra-real, 3 quick questions. Have you read or heard anything about the Be Heard bill? Well, you should get your representative on it to support it immediately as soon as you hear this next segment. Second question, wouldn't you like to know what happened just before Nancy Pelosi released her caucus to move toward formal impeachment inquiry? And question number 3, among all the fiery personalities who make headlines in the House of Representatives, have you ever heard much about one named Katherine Clark, the power behind the power? The answer to all 3 questions is coming right up. The Women's Media Center, founded in 2005 by Jane Fonda, Gloria Steinem, and myself, is a progressive, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization working to make women visible and powerful in media. You can learn more about the WMC at womensmediacenter.com.
You're listening to Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan.
I confess to being quite thrilled about the conversation this week because of its timeliness and its content. My guest is Congresswoman Katherine Clark, who is an American politician representing Massachusetts' 5th Congressional District since 2013. She's also quite powerful. She sits on the House Appropriations Committee, which controls the purse, and that is the power of the House. And she's also the vice chair of the Democratic Caucus. You can always spot her when Speaker of the House Nancy Pelosi gives a press conference or stands on the steps of the House. She stands slightly behind and to the left of the Speaker, the woman with the tall, distinguished look and prematurely white hair. But you don't hear a lot about her publicly. She doesn't seek publicity. She's mild and soft-spoken and very effective. And she has been a quiet but steady champion for women and girls since she served in the Massachusetts State House and State Senate. We had set up this interview before last week's events over Ukraine Gate, and I somehow assumed that she probably would have to cancel it at the last moment. We set it up to discuss her Be Heard bill, the first comprehensive bill that addresses the needs of women raised by the Me Too movement, sexual harassment on the job, and in other areas as well. And given the news that was breaking and the pressure that was being put on the Democrats to finally move toward a formal impeachment inquiry, I assumed we'd get a last-minute cancellation, but we didn't. On the contrary, she took the call. She refused to be rushed. It shows, I think, how much she cares genuinely about the subject of women's rights. And toward the very end, as you'll hear, I did ask her about the current crisis, and you'll hear how she addresses it. She went directly from hanging up after this interview to a meeting of House leadership, and then to a meeting of the full Democratic Caucus, all of which climaxed in Speaker Pelosi's address to the country a few hours after that, in which she announced formal impeachment inquiry. So here is Congresswoman Vice Chair Katherine Clark, and I'm so glad we taped it, and taped it when we did. Welcome to the program, Congresswoman. It's wonderful to have you here, Katherine Clark.
Oh, Robin, I am so pleased to join you. Thank you for having me.
You are, I think, the best kept secret, and I don't like that it's a secret, Wonder Woman for women and kids in government, I think, today in this country. What you have done way back from when you were in the Massachusetts state government has been quiet, consistent, remarkable, whether it's early education for kids, whether it's domestic violence, even noticing that domestic violence can sort of take its vengeance on pets as a way of intimidation and abuse. You passed a bill on that. Straight up to now, today, when you're in House leadership. And I love, by the way, that you started on the Melrose, Massachusetts School Board. I love it. It's just, it's real democracy. And now you're sixth in leadership in the House of Representatives, in the Democratic Caucus, which controls the House. And you have just come out with the Be Heard Act, which is the first comprehensive response to the Me Too movement. Thank you and bless you. And not enough people know about this, so talk about it, please.
Well, thank you, Robin. As we know, the Me Too movement was a monumental cultural awakening, and it showed us the pervasiveness of harassment in our society, in our workplaces, and in our personal lives. And it is the tale of so many women. But the world changed when courageous survivors spoke out.
Yep.
And just last week, it was a beautiful September day, blue skies, and just a crowd of women that gathered together, and men, to say, we're behind this legislation. And there was a huge 8-foot megaphone to make our point that we are going to be heard. And I was excited to be there with the crowd. We have over 100 co-sponsors, and it's growing. And we really have such a grassroots network of supporters that understand we have to take these experience of women, whether they were in restaurant kitchens to Hollywood sets, and put these protections into law if we're really going to close the circle
yes.
on the Me Too movement. And there was a moment for me talking to Barbara Johnson, who is a leader in the Fight for 15, and she talked about the harassment and sexual assault that she had at work, where she was grabbed by the breast by someone who worked for her. And that is exactly what happened to me. And my boss at the time that I worked with said, I'm I wanted to do that all summer. This was a summer kitchen job. But the difference for me was, for Barbara, she had to support a family and keep going to that job.
Right.
And as humiliating as it was for me, I was a college student, and my economic lifeline wasn't in jeopardy.
Yes.
And we have to remember these stories, and wherever they happen, that women and every worker deserves that dignity and respect at work as a baseline to begin with. And that's why I'm so excited that this bill that we're doing with the tremendous leadership of Senator Patty Murray expands worker protections and bolsters existing anti-discrimination laws. And we're looking to reach out to businesses and give them the resources they need. Not every small business has an HR department. Give them the tools to be able to protect their workers and make sure that every workplace is one that really ensures the respect and dignity and can hold perpetrators accountable.
Yes, it is so important, this bill, because yes, of course, it's made headlines first, the Me Too movement with Hollywood stars, and God knows that Hollywood is its own swamp of sexual harassment. But what place isn't? And the people who have the least support until this bill to fight back have been waitresses, women in domestic work, women in lower wage jobs who often have to survive by tipped wages, which of course aren't wages at all. If you don't have a minimum wage and if you're dependent for living on your tips, which if you're wait staff you are, then there's no recourse, because you have to put up with being grabbed, with being assaulted, with being followed after work, with being stalked. And so one thing is connected to another. The knee bone is connected to the ankle bone. The minimum wage makes it unnecessary to have tipped wages, and that in turn gives a woman working as a waiter full time for her whole life, not just as a summer job, but also as a summer job, some grounds to stand on to say, get your hands off me, without losing that tip and losing food for her kids. And the bill does lots of other things as well. It doesn't extend the statute of limitations for complaining.
That's right. Because we have found that for so many victims of workplace harassment and assault, they need that time to be able to file claims. And we want to make sure that whatever their work situation is at the moment, that they have time. Often it is somebody thinks they're all alone and discovers much later that this has been pervasive in their workplace. And so we extend that statute of limitations. We prohibit mandatory arbitration and pre-dispute agreements.
Oh, that's
so that you're
good.
Not signing away your rights before you even begin work.
Yeah.
Back in Massachusetts, we had a case where a woman was raped in her workplace, and it was sent to mandatory arbitration in a whole different state. These are the kinds of power grabs that this legislation is trying to get at, to make sure that we have the laws in place that really levels the playing field and allows people to be judged on the quality of their work and not their feeling, to have the tools to say, I am not going to put up with this, and if I don't, I'm going to be backed up by the rule of law.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's like a whole invisible layer of oppression that has not had daylight, shined on it until this bill. You also introduced legislation on sexual harassment online, which of course has become an enormous, huge problem ever since Gamergate. Internet harassment and doxing and swatting and all those terrible things. You have just quietly been there consistently for women and girls. And I just want to extend my personal, and on behalf of the women's movement, dare I say, gratitude. And I think we should be celebrating you with parades and floats, but that's my opinion. I do.
Well, Robin, I think you put it best with the title of your book, "The Sisterhood is Powerful," and my role in leadership here in the House, and why I ran for elected office is to bring those voices to the table, to make sure that we are not only electing women that represent our country and the beautiful mosaic that it is, but also that we don't just stop there and pat ourselves on the back that we have the most diverse Democratic Caucus in the history of Congress, but that we actually use that diversity and that range of life experiences to influence policy. And that means making room for them and their voices and their perspectives at the leadership table. And whether that's working on the online harassment, the Be Heard Act, it is bringing women's experience of this country to the table, talking about child care and the importance of it, understanding what it's like to be in that generation where you're still caring for children at home and caring for elder parents.
Yeah.
So this is why I am so passionate about being able to amplify those voices and make sure that the experiences of women at home are reflected in women that we send to Congress and that they are heard.
That's so
quite literally in the halls of Congress.
So crucial. Absolutely the most crucial thing. For civilians who are listening, take a moment, if you will, and explain what being vice chair of the Democratic Caucus in the House means in the rhetoric of the House. You're sixth in line after Speaker Pelosi. What does that translate to in action, Katherine?
Well, what it really means is that I am able to help lead our caucus, the Democrats who have the majority in the House of Representatives.
Yes.
And I see very much my leadership role as an extension of the role that I played in recruiting and co-chairing the Red to Blue Committee for the Democrats in 2018, and making sure that those issues that we talked about, whether it was health care, getting corruption out of government, rebuilding our infrastructure, addressing climate change and gun violence, that those issues are the ones that we continue to focus on and that we continue to elevate the freshman voices. And they may be new to Congress, but they're not new to the needs of American families. Mm-hmm. And they are not new to service to their country. We've seen so many women veterans and CIA agents step forward and say, our country needs me. And, whether they were teachers, people who've never run for political office or seasoned, political people at the state level, they are here in Congress. The diversity is beautiful. And I see my job in leadership as making sure that we are convening, we are listening, and we're setting a policy agenda to which they have input because they are our connection to the American people.
You are the bridge.
They need.
And you are the
We're
bridge.
The bridge.
You're the bridge. Absolutely, it's what we need. Since you are in leadership, I cannot help but ask you about leadership. And I've been defending the Speaker's position on not rushing to impeachment, although it's taken every bone and muscle in my body to defend it. But I understand the complexity of the reasons and the Democrats in red states and how we took back the House and all those nuanced reasons for that. And I have such enormous respect and affection for Nancy Pelosi that I've been a major defender, but I've got to say it's getting harder and harder. And so can you give us any insight into the changing feeling in the House about that?
Yes, I think that the Speaker has been clear that this president is not above the law,
Right.
and that the impeachment process, the process of investigating and holding him accountable, is a primary obligation and responsibility of this Congress
Right.
under the Constitution and to uphold our oath of office. And what we have seen with this situation unfolding, having to deal with the whistleblower
Right.
and what the president said to the leader of the Ukraine, he has admitted that he put his own political gain over national security.
It takes your breath
And
away.
this is corruption that cannot go unchecked.
Yeah.
And I think what you are seeing in the House is a very appropriate reaction to that. And I think that it is this question of national security that is really galvanizing people to say this president continues to put himself above the law. And we are, as the House majority, we are the body that can hold him accountable. And, we really have to move in a direction that is decisive because it is as fundamental as our national security.
Yes.
And
yes.
what we saw in the midterms and what we continue to see is the public may be divided on, a process. They may not understand exactly what we're talking about between impeachment investigations or
Right.
inquiries
Exactly.
or whatever the words are, but they understand corruption.
Yes.
And they understand that this is their government, and that when we have a president who is putting his own politics over the national security interests of the country, not only is he failing to faithfully execute the laws of this country, as he said in his oath of office, he's no longer a patriot. And this is the type of corruption that I think the American people are going to understand in a clear way. This
Yes.
is not partisan bickering.
No.
This is fundamentals about national security.
And also, I'm old enough to remember Watergate, of course, and Liz Holtzman recently was on the program and was freshening my own memories. Nixon had won by a landslide, and the majority of the American people didn't want impeachment. They didn't want to mess with it anymore. They were blaming both parties. They wanted to go back to worrying about kitchen table realities. But during the questioning of the hearings, that's when everybody got educated. And by the time the hearings were done, then the American public was not only on board, they were very strongly on board. So it's an educative process, and I think people have to welcome it for that reason alone, although even that, as you say, is literally trumped by national security. So we count on you. We are counting on you, and I'm counting on the fact also, nothing against the men, but awfully glad that there are a record number, still not parity, but a record number of women in Congress, and that you are in leadership is a reassurance to me when I wake up at 4 a.m. and think, my God, the world is ending. What is happening to our republic? I think, well, Katherine Clark's in the leadership. Remember to breathe.
Well, that is more than generous of you, Robin. But I want you to know that I continue to be so impressed with the leaders we have here in the House of Representatives, and not in a strict leadership hierarchy, but truly the leaders in their district that every day are translating what they're hearing from families at home to the policies, to the laws. We really do represent the country in all its strength and its diversity, and it is change,
Yes.
and that is change comes slowly, but it is a profound change in the House of Representatives, and we are going to keep working to make sure that we do everything we can to protect our elections in 2020 and to make sure that not only is this administration held accountable, but that we are putting those needs of American families first and on the front burner here in Congress. And if we do that, we're going to also be able to save our democracy.
I believe that's true. I think we can walk and chew gum at the same time and also pass legislation and rescue the republic. So, again, thank you for everything that you do for women, children, men, and other living things, the environment, reproductive choice, all of that, and for being in the leadership. Women have been traditionally made to feel afraid of power because it's been positioned as power over and used badly. But people like you are about power too, to affect change, and to meet people's needs. And again, much gratitude to you, Katherine, for that. And for the Be Heard Act. So if you have been sexually harassed in any way, shape, or form, keep an eye out for the Be Heard Act. You're not hearing enough about it in the press, and make use of it as it comes into flower. Thank you again for being with us, Congresswoman Katherine, and take care of yourself. You're a gem.
Thank you, Robin. So good to be with you.
We have to take one last quick breather here, and then I'll be right back with some fighting words.
For the smartest talk about news, politics, sex, books, religion, race, and more, it's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Audacious, witty, provocative, informative, and fun. It's Women's Media Center Live with Robin Morgan. Talk radio with a brain.
Time for some fighting words. Oh, yes. Of course, by the time you hear this, everything might have changed again. But a girl can only work with what she's got, and what I've got, all I've got, are words. Characteristically, I've been fascinated by the use of language, hilarious, heartbreaking, and most of all, revealing, during this whole Ukraine gate horror, the trap self-created by Trump that looks to be what will finally bring him down. Take the most common words used this past week by Republican members of the House and the Senate to describe their feelings about this latest violation of law and betrayal of country by their beloved great leader. Disturbing is the most commonly used word, barely edging out troubling. Mitt Romney was disturbed. Ben Sasse found the news troubling. Lindsey Graham was his sassy little Southern self, claiming none of it was a problem. It makes you wonder what these guys would find distressing or even worrisome, not to speak of appalling. They're not normally so understated. For example, remember them declaiming against the toddler hordes of gang members pouring across our borders, pronouncing it was a war, an invasion, and a disgusting threat to our way of life? For once, the Democrats seem to be choosing their words with care and accuracy. All they really need to do is quote the whistleblower's complaint and the Solicitor General's report in the full, riveting power of each document. Plain-spoken words, incriminating Trump almost as much as his own do. But what I really want to celebrate is a simple adverb that all in itself alone addresses the troubled and disturbed confusion of those who claim that in the teeth of the evidence, the transcript of the phone call, there was no Trump statement that made clear there would be no defensive weapons for Ukraine unless Ukraine did his bidding. You know, quid pro quo. Ah, but there is. Other English majors who are at home analyzing the scansion of a Spenserian sonnet, but unaccustomed to decoding documents affecting national security, will understand that this is a bit of a thrill, especially since in the 4 days since the phone call transcript went public, no one seems to have pointed out the importance of this one word, at least not to my knowledge. And I'm a news junkie who reads and watches everything she can. But whether or not I'm the first to point this out, it needs pointing. It comes in the transcript just after the hapless Ukrainian president says, quote, "I would also like to thank you for your great support in the area of defense. We are ready to continue to cooperate for the next steps. Specifically, we are almost ready to buy more javelins from the United States for defense purposes." Close quote. Then Trump says, quote, "I would like you to do us a favor, though, because our country has been through a lot and Ukraine knows a lot about it." Close quote. Yes, earlier he's complained that his help for Ukraine had not been properly reciprocated, and later on he reiterates more of the same. But the key, the code, the smoking quid pro quo resonate from the one word, though. I would like you to do us a favor, though. Although and though both mean in spite of something. Synonyms might be however, nevertheless, nonetheless, despite, and the like. Yes, but that would also work. These are subordinating conjunctions, meaning that the clause they introduce is a subordinate clause, which needs a main clause to make it complete. In the case of though, the subordinate clause, in effect, negates the main clause. For example, main clause, she has a bad cold. Subordinate clause, though she came to work this morning. Although and though make the previous main clause dependent on the subordinate clause. In effect, they overturn it. They force it to rely on the subordinate clause for its meaning. We need defensive weapons. I need a favor, though. Trump blurts out more evidence every 5 minutes, so this humble contribution may not mean much, but I do confess it tickles me that so much can hang on a single word, that grammar and vocabulary have value after all in a world of emojis and pictographs, and that an adverb might save the Republic. Those are my fighting words. Add yours on Twitter, and remember to tag us at WMC Live and use the hashtag #FightingWords. And that's our show for this week. You can follow me on Twitter, Facebook, and now on Instagram at @TheRobinMorgan. And you can check out my blog at robinmorgan.net, find my latest book, Dark Matter, wherever books are sold, and you can pre-order my forthcoming brand new novel in a few weeks. It'll be out, Parallax. Opinions expressed on this program do not necessarily represent the Women's Media Center. Here's the family for Women's Media Center Live. Executive producer as well as founding and sustaining sponsor, Regina K. Scully. WMC president and co-executive producer of this program, Julie Burton. I'm Robin Morgan, your producer and host. Thank you for being with us. Who knows what will have happened by the next time we meet, so be sure to join us then on Women's Media Center Live.